over the Zambezi, casting a molten glow across the restless waters that had shaped the lives of the Tonga people for generations. Among the reeds and palm-lined banks, a young boy named Temba knelt and traced his fingers along the water's edge, feeling the cool, pulsing life of the river. The elders often spoke of Nyame Nyame, the river spirit, a mighty being with the body of a serpent and the head of a fish who governed the waters and protected the people. Temba, though young, had long sensed the river's voice in the ripples and the wind that danced across the surface. Each morning, as mist curled over the waves, he felt a tug, a subtle whisper calling him deeper into the mysteries of the Zambezi. The river seemed alive with stories, murmuring of blessings and of dangers that lay hidden in its currents. That morning, Temba's mother warned him against wandering too far. "The river gives life, but it takes without mercy," she said, her voice tight with worry. But Temba could not resist. Something within the river had awakened a yearning he could not ignore. As he waded into the shallows, the water around his feet swirled unnaturally, cold and alive, as though testing him. A sudden surge lifted him slightly, and for a brief heartbeat, he glimpsed the immense, glimmering form of Nyame Nyame beneath the surface. Fear and awe gripped him, yet the spirit's eyes, deep and wise, seemed neither threatening nor cruel. They were a mirror of the river itself, powerful, eternal, and alive with secrets. Temba stepped back, heart racing, yet the whisper lingered, threading into his soul like a promise he could neither deny nor forget. Later that evening, the village gathered around the fire, elders' voices weaving stories that stretched back through countless generations. They spoke of Nyame Nyame as the guardian of the Zambezi, a spirit whose moods could bring bountiful floods or catastrophic destruction. Temba listened intently, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. The elders spoke of how his ancestors had once built the great Kariba Dam in defiance of Nyame Nyame, and how the spirit had roared in fury, sending the river into unpredictable floods and taking loved ones away. The stories were not just warnings, they were living memories, and Temba felt their weight pressing upon him. He realized the river was not merely water and fish, it was a living force that demanded respect, an ancient presence entwined with the fate of everyone who dwelled along its banks. Temba's grandfather, the oldest of the elders, leaned forward, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Nyame Nyame speaks to those who listen, child," he said gravely, "not in words, but in currents, in storms, in the cries of fish. He watches, he tests, and he remembers. The river is patient, yet it does not forgive easily." Temba shivered at the weight of the warning, but inside, he felt a spark of determination. He understood that his connection with the river went beyond curiosity. If Nyame Nyame had revealed himself, even briefly, it was because the spirit had chosen him for a purpose yet unknown. That night, as the village slept under the crescent moon, Temba could not close his eyes. The river called, and he knew he would answer, no matter the danger that awaited him in its depths. The following week, the skies over the Zambezi darkened with a foreboding intensity, swirling clouds reflecting ominously on the water. Temba, drawn to the river as always, noticed that the wind carried a strange musical hum, like the resonance of some ancient instrument. The river churned, rising higher than he had ever seen, sending a sudden panic through the village. Trees bent under the gusts, and the once familiar shores now seemed alien, threatening. People scrambled to secure their homes and livestock, but Temba stood at the edge, mesmerized. There, beneath the heaving surface, he saw Nyame Nyame coil through the waves, vast and unyielding. The spirit's eyes glowed like molten gold, and Temba felt a pulse through his chest, a wordless command, a recognition of his presence and the storm's purpose. As the villagers fought against the rising flood, Temba realized he was no longer just an observer. He plunged into the water, letting the river take him in its embrace. The spirit swirled around him, lifting and carrying him as if testing his resolve. He heard the whispers in the rushing water, warnings, pleas, and instructions in a language he somehow understood. The storm's fury seemed to be both a threat and a lesson, teaching him the power he must respect and the courage he must summon. Exhausted, yet exhilarated, Temba emerged from the river hours later, soaked and trembling, but alive. He knew the river had marked him, preparing him for a destiny entwined with the spirit's eternal will. Days passed, and the village began repairing the damage caused by the storm. Temba, however, could not shake the memory of Nyame Nyame's presence. One morning, he ventured to the rapids, where the river crashed violently against jagged rocks, white foam spraying like 100 tiny waterfalls. As he approached, he saw shapes forming in the mist, the head of the great serpent, eyes glimmering with intelligence, watching him. The river hummed around him, and Temba fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sense that the spirit was revealing a fragment of its purpose. In the spray of the rapids, he glimpsed visions-flooded villages, thriving communities, a world bound by water and life, yet also vulnerable to human folly. The images were disjointed, confusing, and yet vivid, imprinting themselves on his mind like dreams that refused to fade. As the vision ended, Temba felt a surge of resolve unlike anything before. Nyame Nyame's presence was no longer just a story or a whisper, it was a summons. The river demanded that he act as a bridge between human and spirit to understand its needs and protect its balance. Returning to the village, he struggled to explain what he had seen, but words felt inadequate. Only the elders could interpret the signs, but even they had never fully understood the river's language. Temba realized that his path was both an honor and a burden. He would have to learn to listen with more than his ears, to see with more than his eyes, if he was to honor Nyame Nyame and preserve the fragile harmony between the Zambezi and its people. Months later, news arrived that foreign engineers were returning to continue the expansion of the Kariba Dam, ignoring the warnings of the elders and the sacred connection the Tonga people had with the river. Temba watched as machines approached the bands, their metallic roar clashing with the gentle, insistent murmur of the river. He could sense Nyame Nyame's anger rising beneath the surface. The water itself seemed to pulse with warning, waves lashing against rocks and trees in protest. The elders held councils, debating how to confront this encroachment, but Temba knew the solution would require more than speeches. The spirit had chosen him to act, to intervene where human authority failed, and he felt the weight of that responsibility pressing down like the heavy monsoon clouds above. One night, under a crescent moon, Temba returned to the river alone. The waters welcomed him, cold and alive, and Nyame Nyame emerged in full, majestic glory, coiling around him without threat, its voice deep and resonant in his mind. "The river is not yours to command," it said, and Temba felt its meaning as both warning and guidance. He realized that confronting the engineers would not be a battle of force, but a test of wisdom and courage. The river would aid him, but only if he acted with insight, humility, and an unbreakable bond to its spirit. That night, Temba swore an oath to protect the Zambezi, to speak with the river's voice, and to ensure that Nyame Nyame's wrath and blessing remained balanced for generations to come. Temba knew that to appeal to the spirit, he would need to undertake a journey upriver, to the sacred rapids, where the waters were strongest, and the connection to Nyame Nyame was most potent. He packed provisions, and with a small canoe, he pushed off into the churning currents. The journey was grueling. The river tested him at every turn, with sudden whirlpools, submerged rocks, and fierce storms that seemed to mirror his inner doubts. Yet with each challenge, he felt the spirit guiding him, nudging him forward. He began to hear the river, not just as water, but as a living memory, flowing with history, pain, joy, and the unbroken voice of Nyame Nyame itself. On the third day, he arrived at the sacred rapids. Foam exploded around him as the river roared with untamed energy, and in the midst of the chaos, the great serpent's head, emerged, eyes burning with ancient wisdom. Temba knelt on the rocks, feeling the spray on his face as the spirit's voice spoke directly to his heart. "You have come," it murmured. "Now you must listen, not as a boy, but as one who carries the river's will." For hours, he communed with the spirit, learning the currents of both water and destiny, understanding the delicate balance between human desire and the river's eternal needs. By nightfall, Temba rose, exhausted but enlightened, carrying within him the wisdom of the river and the courage to face the challenges awaiting his people. Returning to the village, Temba shared the vision and instructions he had received at the rapids. He spoke of the delicate balance that must be maintained, of the sacrifices the river would demand, and of the power that Nyame Nyame could unleash if disrespected. The elders listened with reverent attention, realizing that Temba had been chosen as the intermediary between their people and the river spirit. Plans were made, and the villagers prepared to confront the engineers, not with violence, but with unity, knowledge, and ritual. Temba taught them the songs, the offerings, and the gestures that would honor Nyame Nyame and demonstrate their respect, hoping that the river spirit would sway those who sought to dominate its flow. The engineers arrived with their machines, expecting compliance, yet they were met with a sight that unnerved even the most determined. Villagers chanted, drums beating in rhythm with the river's pulse, while Temba waded into the shallows, raising his hands toward the swirling waters. The river itself seemed to respond. Waves rose, mist twisted around him, and for a brief moment, the spirit manifested fully above the current, a magnificent serpent of shimmering scales. The engineers paused, unsure whether they faced myth or reality. Temba's voice carried over the roar of the water. "This river is alive, and it will not be tamed without its will considered. Respect it, or face consequences you cannot control." In the days that followed, tensions rose as the engineers debated whether to continue. Temba continued his vigil at the river, offering sacrifices and prayers and observing the subtle signs of Nyame Nyame's favor. Fish leapt in unusual patterns. Water rose and fell in rhythms that only he seemed to understand, and the river seemed to guide the people's actions in ways that defied explanation. Temba realized that his connection was deepening. The river's voice was becoming part of him, as though the spirit and boy were entwined in a bond that transcended mere sight or sound. Each decision he made felt sanctioned by the currents themselves, and he grew in confidence and responsibility. One evening, the river presented a test. Torrential rain fell without warning, turning the Zambezi into a raging torrent. Temba had to lead a rescue for villagers stranded on rapidly flooding banks. He dove into the storm, trusting in Nyame Nyame's guidance, and navigated the treacherous waters with a skill and courage that astounded even the elders. Each life he saved, each peril he avoided, reinforced his understanding. The river's power was not to dominate or fear, but to honor and channel. By dawn, the storm passed, leaving the village safe, the engineers hesitant, and Temba forever changed, carrying the mantle of protector as Nyame Nyame's chosen. Finally, after months of delicate negotiations and careful rituals, Nyame Nyame fully manifested for the villagers. Emerging from the Zambezi with scales glinting like molten metal, the river spirit towered over the waters, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Its eyes swept over Temba, and he felt the full weight of its ancient wisdom and power. The villagers fell silent, hearts pounding, as the spirit's voice echoed in their minds and over the river banks, teaching them about balance, respect, and the consequences of human hubris. Temba stepped forward, speaking the words he had learned from the river itself, bridging the gap between human and spirit with courage and reverence. Nyame Nyame coiled gently around the river, and the Zambezi calmed, returning to its familiar rhythm. The spirit lingered, a silent promise that it would watch over the people, protect them, and guide them as long as they honored the river's needs. The engineers, awed and shaken, agreed to alter their plans, finally recognizing that some forces could not be tamed by machinery or ambition alone. Temba felt a profound peace settle over him. He had fulfilled the river's call, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian, carrying the spirit's wisdom into the future. For the first time, he understood that Nyame Nyame was not merely a being of legend, but the living pulse of the Zambezi itself. Years passed, and Temba grew into a wise young man, revered by his people as the chosen guardian of the Zambezi. He walked the banks of the river daily, listening to the whispers of currents, reading the signs of storms, and teaching the next generation the songs and rituals that honored Nyame Nyame. The river had become his teacher, his ally, and his friend, a constant flowing presence that shaped his life with both challenge and guidance. He realized that the Spirit's gift was not power over the water, but understanding, humility, and a bond that connected human and river in unbreakable harmony. In the quiet hours before dawn, Temba often sat at the rapids where he had first truly met Nyame Nyame, letting the water rush past him in a symphony of life and movement. He no longer sought visions or signs, for he had learned to feel the river in every heartbeat and breath. And as the villagers thrived alongside the Zambezi, he knew that Nyame Nyame's presence was woven into the very fabric of their existence, a silent, protective force, eternal as the river itself. Temba smiled, dipping his hand into the water and feeling the gentle tug of the spirit's currents, a reminder that the river's story, like life itself, was ever flowing, and he, the keeper, would guard it faithfully for all time.